The Orlando Magic are obviously still trying to learn how to win and develop their team. So what can they learn from the play-in teams? We're going to hit playoff lessons from 3 of the 4 teams that lost in the play-in tournament on today's Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is April 28th, 2022. My name is Philip Rossman-Reich. I'm the expert and site editor over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. Of course, follow me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, we're going to go through some playoff lessons. Something that I like to do, or I've started doing, is as teams get eliminated from the playoffs, I think about their team building, and I think about their play styles and why they were successful or not successful during their season, and what that can teach us for the Magic as they begin to rebuild. We're at this really exciting beginning stage of a rebuild. Everything is still new. There's really still seemingly limitless possibilities in front of us. And so it's important to understand what makes teams succeed or fail, and understand the pitfalls that, and obviously looking back at Magic history as well, but understand the pitfalls of what to watch for as this team advances. There's going to be some good comparisons. There's obviously going to be some unrealistic comparisons. We'll find something to learn from the Nets that applies to this Magic team, but obviously the Nets are a whole different animal. We're going to talk about the Hornets, the Spurs, and the Cavaliers on today's episode of Locked On Magic. But before we do that, we want to thank you for making the time to listen to us today, whether you're your first listen of the day, whether you're listening to us right when we upload. At some point during the day, we truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. Remember, the great podcasts on the Locked On Podcast Network are available wherever you download podcasts. To search for Locked On and the team you're looking for. Also, do not forget, tomorrow, Friday, April 29th, I will be hosting a Twitter Spaces on @OMagicDaily on my big channel. Friday, that'll be at 5:30 p.m. about. So make sure you're following me on Twitter @OMagicDaily. You can get the latest on the Orlando Magic there as well. We'll talk about the NBA draft. I'll answer some Magic questions. We'll have a nice little Twitter Spaces talking about the Orlando Magic and do a quick mock draft as well. So that'll be really exciting. I had a really good time doing the Spotify Live last week, trying to get more interaction here where we can. But let's start talking about the playoff teams. The first thing I want to say is when I post these, I sometimes get some snarky comments saying, "Oh, you're playing tournaments your goal. That's where you want to be." And I'm like, no, absolutely not. This team wants to compete for championships. It wants to do something more than that. But the Magic have the second worst record in the league. There's a stepping stone. There's a process to getting better. The Orlando Magic, after drafting Shaq, were the 9 seed in the Eastern Conference before jumping up to the 4 seed. Dwight Howard's Orlando Magic missed the playoffs in 2006 after a late rally to try and make a playoff push. They were the 8th seed in 2007, and then they won the division in 2008. You watch a lot of these teams, barring crazy free agency or barring some massive leap, most of these teams have a stepping stone process to get where they want to be, to get to that championship level contention. The Golden State Warriors under Mark Jackson were a 6 seed that upset a 3 seed before they became a championship level team. And then they lost in the first round the year after that, which ended up with the firing of Mark Jackson. But that's the reality of how this goes. So it's a stepping stone process. Why do we talk about the play-in tournament so much for this Orlando Magic team? Because it's a more realistic goal than saying the Magic can win a championship in 2023. If the Magic make the play-in tournament in 2023, that will be seen as a huge success because it means players have gotten better and developed. The team has come together. They found a way to win, and especially with this team, it feels like they've got the beginnings of something. It feels like they've got the start to do something bigger, to take that next step, to go from 8 seed to 4 seed to championship contender, if that makes sense. That's kind of the progression that you want to see. The stepping stones, the little steps that a team has to take to get where it's trying to go, and ultimately to compete for a championship. Again, that's the ultimate goal. We're not losing sight of that, but there's a process to get there. There are stepping stones that have to be made to get there. I mean, we'll talk about the Memphis Grizzlies later on in the playoffs for sure, but this first round series has been a fascinating study for them because it's a young team playing as the favorite for the first time, feeling the pressure of a team hunting them. Memphis is going to be a better team next year because of what they're going through this year. And obviously there'll be some other things they have to worry about, some tactical things they have to worry about. The playoffs expose your every flaw and weakness. And you have to begin to understand, okay, how do we fill this gap? How do we get better in these areas? And, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the Magic's playoff history here in a minute. But at the end of the day, everything comes down to what is your moment, and how do you take advantage of that moment when it's there? I say this all the time. I know on this show, a team is only stuck. A team is only in a bad spot when it can't advance forward anymore, when it doesn't have the ability to get better, to be a better team. That the 2020 Magic ended up being the zenith, ended up being the top of the hill. And the Orlando Magic under Jeff Weltman, whether they were trying to have feet in both waters, whether they were waiting on injuries that just didn't play the right way, the Magic failed in 2021 because they didn't take that next step. They didn't understand that their window was open, or that they had a window that was open, or maybe they did understand that it wasn't really a window. It was like a one of those air conditioning grates, like the one that's up above me here somewhere. And you really can't squeeze through that. And so playing it out until it imploded was the plan for them, was the play for them. And obviously they ran out of time. Aaron Gordon requested trade. Evan Fournier was a free agent. Nikola Vucevic was at his max trade value. The Magic, hit reset at, you could argue that they should have done it sooner, but once it was very clear that it wasn't working, it was very clear that they weren't getting any better. They got stuck and they took the escape hatch and got out. The Charlotte Hornets are very much kind of at this stage. And I think what's interesting about Charlotte is they're not like the 2020 Magic, but roster-wise at least. But they are like the 2020 Magic in that they repeated the same thing from 2021 to 2022. The Charlotte Hornets were blown out in a play-in tournament loss last season against the Indiana Pacers. They were blown out in a play-in tournament loss this season against the Atlanta Hawks. That is stagnation. And there's no stagnation in this league. You're either getting ahead or falling behind. You're either advancing, getting better, or you are getting worse. There is no stagnation. And when you're stuck in the same spot in the standings, that means something is fun. That means something is probably wrong with your roster. Adding to the pressure, Charlotte has a star. Say what you want about the 2019-2020 Magic. I will always have a soft spot in my heart for that 2019 team, especially. We all knew what the fundamental flaw of that team was. As good as Nikola Vucevic was, they didn't have a star. They didn't have a guy who could get a bucket when the defense was loaded up against you. We saw it in the playoffs how Toronto loaded up on Nikola Vucevic and literally dared anyone else to beat them. Literally dared everyone else to beat them. Evan Fournier, Aaron Gordon, Jonathan Isaac, Terrence Ross, DJ Augustine. They dared other teams to beat them. And the Magic, obviously, they didn't have the resource, or they were unwilling to spend the resources to go get that player, even if it was like a Russell Westbrook or someone. We had that debate that summer in 2020, I believe, before he ended up in Washington. The Charlotte Hornets have a star. LaMelo Ball is a star. That guy is good. He completely transformed that team, really pushed them into the stratosphere, into a place where they are competing in the play-in tournament. Again, a small step, but an important step. But that now means their clock is ticking. That now means they've got until the end of his rookie extension contract, so still another 6 years, to build a contending team. Once that star, and I talk about this a lot when people pitch me ideas for the Magic to acquire stars, the clock starts ticking once you get that star player. The stars want to win, or any star you want wants to win, first and foremost. And so the Hornets are feeling that pressure. They stagnated. They stayed in the same spot. They they made the play-in tournament again, but failed to advance, failed to put up a fight to get to that elimination game. They weren't even the favored teams or the teams with the advantage in the play-in tournament. They had to fight to get to the elimination game. And they were unable to do so. Now, there's certainly a lot of factors into that. Injuries. Gordon Hayward was out for most of the year. They really didn't have a center. They've really struggled to find help at center. And certainly I think that's going to be a focus for Charlotte, both in free agency and the draft. Is the reason why Charlotte is one of the rumored teams to be chasing after Rudy Gobert. That would significantly help their defense, which was extremely poor this year, once again, negating one of the most exciting and flashy offenses in the league. And to Charlotte's credit, they've got a nice mix of veteran and young players that they have pieces they can move around. Terry Rozier and Gordon Hayward's contracts will be really difficult to move, but Terry Rozier is certainly movable. They have the ability to go out and re-sign Miles Bridges as restricted free agent this summer. The Hornets have avenues to improve. But clearly one of the reasons why they fired James Borrego, love James Borrego. I love the job that he did in Charlotte, but clearly one of the reasons they fired him was they understand they're under pressure to win now. They can't be a play-in tournament team next year. If Charlotte is a play-in tournament team, not a 7-8 seed, if they are not in the playoffs, if they're not a top 6 team next season, I am certain Charlotte will feel that season was not a success, that season was a failure. Because now their clock is ticking. Now they're feeling the pressure to get better, to be a better team, to be a factor because they have the all-star. A lot of our talk in the draft this year has been talking about finding players who can be all-stars, who can go down in a playoff series and get a basket. But once you have that, once it's clear that guy is developed, the clock starts ticking. And you're seeing the pressure, even at a young age, even after a second season, the pressure that creates for a franchise like the Charlotte Hornets. We're going to talk a little bit about what the San Antonio Spurs do so well and how there is a little bit of a parallel to what the Magic are trying to do, although it's hard to beat Gregg Popovich. We'll talk about that coming up here in just a moment. But first, a quick word, pals at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. So find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the MLB season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic your first listen every day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. So this was a weird season for the San Antonio Spurs. A lot of respect for the San Antonio Spurs. They are still the model organization for small markets and for markets that aren't going to get free agents. Miami's its own thing, but Miami Heat's very much the evolution of that. An attractive market team that establish a culture and an identity. And we all know the kind of program that Gregg Popovich has built. They are strong defensively. They're disciplined offensively. They have selfless guys. It's everything that the Magic have always talked about wanting to be, but have frankly failed to execute. Now, 100%, a lot of San Antonio's success was banked on winning the lottery in the right year, getting a guy like Tim Duncan and really developing and establishing him alongside a veteran like David Robinson. They had a really lucky tank year for them. And obviously everything's worked out really well for them for the last decade and a half almost. But there is something different about San Antonio. And a lot of San Antonio's success, as small as it might have been this year, a lot of San Antonio's success is a credit to Gregg Popovich. Like, literally, a lot of credit, I feel, just goes to Gregg Popovich for the job the San Antonio Spurs did this season. By no means did San Antonio have the season that they usually have. By no means can you call San Antonio's season an unequivocated success. I think there are still a lot of questions about the Spurs and a really uncertain future. San Antonio needs some lottery luck again. They're starting from scratch, and it has been a long time since they've done that. They really haven't started at this low of a level talent-wise since drafting David Robinson in 1987. Like seriously, go look up at the Spurs franchise history. even before Popovich. Since joining the NBA, the San Antonio Spurs have been one of the most successful franchises in the NBA, not just in terms of winning titles, but making the playoffs. They do not miss the playoffs. And so the last 2 years, now I'm pretty sure this is the last 2 years is the first time the Spurs have missed the playoffs in consecutive seasons since before David Robinson. Again, that's like the late 80s. That's how good the Spurs franchise has been consistently over their history. Spurs history is just, it's fascinating how they've been able to build that culture and build that kind of consistency. The Suns are another team that very quietly have a very interesting history on that front as well, despite, ownership being what it is. The way the Spurs developed this season, I think, is 100% a credit to Gregg Popovich. There is no coach in the league that understands the long game, that understands the long ups and downs of a season, that understands how to manage and grow a team quite like Gregg Popovich. Why was he the first guy to really put a focus on resting players and keeping players fresh? It's because he understands what the ultimate goal is at the end of the season. Why are the Spurs so good, and why does it seem like losses don't necessarily matter to him? It's because there's a bigger vision. And oftentimes in some of these regular season games, Popovich is working on something that's going to matter later than something that matters now. It's the pounding the rock thing is the Spurs mantra. Go back to the 2021 Olympics. Why did Team USA not seem concerned or worried about early losses and early struggles? Because Popovich was trying to bring a team together. And yes, he was using exhibition games. He was using the early parts of that tournament to bring that team together. He stuck with his ideas. He developed those ideas. And by the time the gold medal game came around, they were by far the best team in that tournament. And, I know the score was kind of close in that France game, but they won that game easily. They blew through the back half of that tournament. And I'm very passionate about USA basketball. I have very specific ideas for how I think USA basketball needs to be run. And if Grant Hill wants to give me a call, and ask me what those ideas are, I'm happy to share them. And we'll talk more Team USA basketball, I'm sure, as we get closer to the World Cup here in a couple of years. But Gregg Popovich did a masterful coaching job, made me eat a lot of my words, made me eat a lot of my doubts, because he always has an idea of what the long term is. Again, the Spurs had their worst record since 1997, since the 1997 season, when the year before they drafted Tim Duncan. They did not have a good season by record. They were dead in the water, down and out. But Gregg Popovich always has the big picture in mind. He always has the grander vision of what he and his team are trying to do. And he stuck with that vision over and over and over again. He trusted DeJounte Murray to blossom into an all-star. He gave Keldon Johnson the ability to develop. He maximized what he had on the roster, and they just kept chugging along. They just kept ticking away. And as the Lakers fell apart, as other teams around them fell apart, they emerged as the play-in tournament team, as the team that was going to get that 10 seed and play and have a chance to make the playoffs. They were dead in the water. Like, seriously, guys, they were dead in the water. And the gift and beauty of this play-in tournament is it brings teams back to life. It keeps teams involved. The play-in tournament is doing what it was meant to do. Give more teams a reason to play late in the season. Without the play-in tournament, the Spurs would have tanked. Everyone was calling for them to tank. I think even some of their fans were saying, "Hey, we got to get our star. Let's kind of drift to the end of the season." But that's not the Gregg Popovich way. And by the end of the season, the Spurs were, playing decent defense, not great, playing decent offense, not necessarily the best in the league, but they were scratching and clawing and doing what they needed to do to get wins. This long-term vision, this idea of what the end goal is and having a plan to get there is essential for coaching. Steve Clifford said this all the time. You want to be playing your best at the end of the season. There's always that long-term vision. There's always that long-term goal and that long-term progression that you're trying to get to. And, I have to say, this is one thing that I think Jamal Mosley was really good at this year. There are a lot of things I'm still concerned about with Jamal Mosley as a coach. A lot of things that can't be tested in the kind of season the Magic have. But the one thing Jamal Mosley did really, really well was he kept this team engaged and focused on the bigger vision. And it's not just a vision for this year. It's obviously a vision going a year in advance, 2 years in advance even. The idea of, hey, we're building something special. You saw how invested every player on this roster was, even though it was a difficult season by the record, even though it was a tough year for this Orlando Magic team. Wendell Carter is excited about what this team can do. Markelle Fultz is excited about what this team can do. There are so many guys who are excited to be part of this team. Mo Bamba wants to return to this team. And it's not just because he likes the people. It's because they believe in what this team can do. And I think that is a credit. That is the biggest credit we can give Jamal Mosley this year, is he kept this team together. He kept this team playing hard until maybe the last 2 weeks of the season when it was very clear what the Magic were doing. This team played really well together. There were bad moments, obviously, and the Magic's bad moments were catastrophically bad. Once they started bleeding, it took them a long time to stop and get themselves right. And that's what happens with young teams. That's what happens when you don't have a bucket getter. Again, like that's going to be the central focus, I think, for this offseason and in the next offseason maybe, is find a guy who can get you a bucket. But at the end of the day, Jamal Mosley did that job. He kept the team together. They got better as the season went on. They had a strong finish of the year. To me, that's going to be another big goal for next season, regardless of what the Magic's final record is. Finish the season strong, end it on an upswing, keep getting better, and win some more games, obviously, throughout the course of the season. We're past the point of tanking at this point for this franchise. But Mosley has that understanding of the big picture now. Obviously, it's different when there's also winning expectation, when there's an idea and an identity that you're trying to develop. And that's going to be the next stage of Mosley's evolution. But there is no doubt that Mosley had this big picture in mind, that he had this vision, this idea of what comes next for Orlando. And obviously, there's still a lot more work to do to get where the Magic want to be. But having that big picture and keeping that in mind as you work every single day, that's going to create results. It's, if you do that part right, again, it's another Spurs saying, process over results. Do the right things every day, and more often than not, you're going to get the win in the end. We'll talk a little bit about what the Magic can do, what the Magic can learn from the Cleveland Cavaliers coming up in just a moment. But first, this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. So I endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. So save time and money when using Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for more than 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every customer, and they have everything you can need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car, truck, right? Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. So we're going to move on now to the Cleveland Cavaliers. One of the best stories of this season until injuries really derailed them. The Cavaliers and the Bulls, injuries just completely derailed their seasons. They were having really special seasons, and we're setting up a really exciting Eastern Conference playoffs. I think the Cavaliers are certainly upset and frustrated that they ended up missing the playoffs because they were the 6th seed for most of the season. But ultimately, I do think they believe their season was a success. They were projected by Vegas to win 23 games this season. They ended up winning, I think it was 44, something like that. They made a really big leap. And I think for Magic fans, the leap that Cleveland made is the kind of leap the Magic hope they can make. Again, a young team that just caught fire. They found their star, and all of a sudden, everything seemed to make sense and fit into place. They had the right veterans to help them out, and they were aggressive enough to keep getting better, to keep trying to add good players. Cleveland's situation is not completely like Orlando's in a lot of ways, but there is one strategy that I think Cleveland employed that is certainly something that can be copied. Certainly you have to make the right moves. Everything's about making the right transactions and making the right moves. So nothing is ever guaranteed. Nothing is ever certain. No plan works unless you do the right things within that plan. The right draft picks, the right trades, the right free agents. You always have to make good decisions. But the way Cleveland built their roster is really fascinating. Obviously, it centers around the first thing it does is it centers around their draft picks. Colin Sexton, to some extent, although he's a restricted free agent, it's not clear what's going to happen with him this offseason. He was hurt most of the season anyway. Darius Garland and Evan Mobley. Darius Garland and Evan Mobley are really the big keys. Darius Garland obviously took a huge leap this year, becoming an NBA All-Star and really becoming a strong ball-dominant guard. The way defenses guarded him changed as the season went on, and he adjusted brilliantly to it. Going out and trading for key veteran players or key young veteran players. The Cavs went for it. They went out and aggressively pursued their guys or took advantage of opportunities to get really high-level players. The Brooklyn Nets gifting Cleveland Jared Allen is one of the great highway robberies, and you can't tell me looking at that Brooklyn team that they couldn't use Jared Allen this year. Jared Allen became an all-star this year, but he's just a solid defender, a solid scorer around the basket, and just continued to expand his game, a perfect partner with Darius Garland. You got to give them credit, although he finished the season hurt and was eventually traded to Indiana. Grabbing Ricky Rubio was a big boost to that team, gave them a veteran point guard to ease the pressure off Darius Garland and really kind of set the tone for the team. Having that veteran voice really, really, really helped them. And obviously drafting Evan Mobley, jumping into the top four, getting a player like that, like I said with second round picks, that was an accelerant. That move, that pick was gravy for a young team that was growing and took them from here to here. Scotty Barnes did the same thing with Toronto. Took them from a middling team to a playoff team, to a solid playoff team. And again, Cleveland did end up missing the playoffs this year, but a lot of that was due to injuries and the team just trying to still come together so much on the fly. It's going to be interesting to see how they play with expectations. The lesson in all that, and this is something I say about the draft, and this is something you could say about trades too, is don't be so married to your own guys. But if there's a guy you like, if there's a guy that can help your team, you do what it takes to get them. Now, you don't sell the farm necessarily. You weigh the cost-benefit analysis of it all. If Jared Allen didn't work out the way he did, this whole thing for Cleveland could have blown up in their face. They could have been as bad as everyone expected, and they'd be in the lottery again looking for a high draft pick, and they'd be down some assets. There's always a risk. There's always a risk and a downside to any trade, to any deal that you make. But the overall idea of being aggressive, for having a plan, for putting together young players, for chasing young players when they become available, that plan for Cleveland worked. That plan is a good one. To me, and I think this is a fair criticism of Jeff Weltman and his front office, you got to have players you like. And obviously you got to keep those kind of players close to your heart and not reveal them to other people because then they'll start price gouging you. But if there's someone you like, whether it's in the draft, whether it's on the trade market, you go out and aggressively pursue them. You go out and you make offers. You make deals. You try to get the players you like. You don't just be a victim, not necessarily a victim, but you don't just be stuck to your circumstance. In this league, you do sometimes have to create your circumstance. You have to create situations where you improve, where you get better, where you get guys that you want to build with the pillars that you want to build with. You can't do this in a panic way. You can't do this in a panicked way. And if the deal is too great, the deal is too great. But you chase after the guys that make you better. You chase after the players that are going to make your team better. Now, obviously, I think one of the areas where the Magic are still figuring stuff out is they don't know who they're building around yet. They don't have the franchise pillar. Cleveland, maybe they had that in Darius Garland. Maybe they understood what Darius Garland was last year before everyone else did. But they understood we have two really good guards in Darius Garland and Colin Sexton. We need to surround them with shooting. So they got Karis LeVert. They went out and got Lauri Markkanen. We need to give them a strong pick and roll center. They went out and got Jared Allen. They got, they add to shooting, they added Karis LeVert. We need a veteran in hand to kind of guide them and rein in their eccentricities at time. They went out and got Ricky Rubio. They understood what their young stars needed to be better, and they went out and got it. Again, what do the Magic need right now? They need a ball-dominant guy. They need a guy, the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak. That's why I've been big on Paolo Banchero. That's why I think a lot of Magic fans are intrigued with the idea of bringing in Shaedon Sharpe. Jaden Ivey, I think, is someone that fans are interested in, although I do think there's a lot of downside to him and some questions about fit. But the Magic ultimately need to figure out who they're building around and then figure out how to make the most of them, how to help them be the best version of themselves. And when they figure that out, they need to go out and get those players, no matter the cost, because at the end of the day, the cost is worth the cost is worth the reward. If you believe that Franz Wagner is the next superstar player, go get the players that make him better. And if there are players on the roster that don't make him better, they become expendable. Now, obviously, again, that's the issue the Magic have right now. The central issue the Magic have right now is figuring out that pecking order. Who is the star of this team? Who is the guy that you're ultimately building around? Who's the guy you are trying to make better? You're trying to make a better player, a better version of himself. Those are the big questions facing the Orlando Magic, and that is obviously the big question for this franchise and this organization as they move forward. That's going to do it for me today, though. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Of course, find us on Twitter at Locked On Magic. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey. All the fun places on my podcast to your podcast-enabled listening device. You can find me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. And of course, for the latest on the Orlando Magic, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can follow us there on Twitter at OMagicDaily. That's where you're going to find our Twitter space tomorrow, Friday, April 29th, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be on at Magic Daily doing a Twitter space. We'll do our mock draft Friday and talk a little bit about the Orlando Magic as well. If you have any questions on anything, we'll just have a nice chat about the Orlando Magic. Now that you're done listening to us, be sure to check out the Locked On NBA podcast from the first jump ball of the play-in tournament to the last position of the finals. Locked On experts take you deep inside the playoffs with insight and analysis affecting all 30 teams. Definitely check it out as the NBA playoffs first round gets set to come to a close this weekend. Thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. For Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.